When Tyler called herself colored, the internet had a major meltdown. Now, understandably so, the word colored does not mean the same thing across the world. In South Africa, being colored is not just about your race. It's a culture, it has a history, it is tied to an identity. Abroad, it's a slur. Here, it's not. But let's break it down.
Okay, let's go.
So when we say colored in South Africa, we are speaking about a history that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. At the Cape, the Khoi and San intermingled with enslaved Southeast Asians, East Africans, and Europeans, giving rise to communities or a community that had its own unique languages, cuisines, and cultural traditions.
The Population Registration Act of 1950 is one that was very complex, and I want people to take it with a pinch of salt because this is information that is historic and it doesn't necessarily mean that people still identify as such today. If you want the title of the book, it is down in the caption. I use the term mix cautiously when talking about colored identity. While miscegenation is an important part of how coloredness is formed, racial mixing is not the only way that coloredness is socially or legally constructed. It is more accurate to think of coloredness as a mixture of people from different backgrounds than to think that being of mixed heritage makes someone colored. The Population Registration Act of 1950 recognized this reality. While the determination of who would be white or black was crudely based on general appearance or parentage, colored was the only racial classification that had 4 distinct types. A person determined to be colored would be Malay, Cape colored, Griqua, or other colored. Malay colored were those considered to be direct descendants of enslaved Malay with no apparent mixed heritage. Cape colored referred to people who were thought to be descendants of mixed heritage that included Cape colonists, enslaved Malay, and indigenous African people like the Khoi San or amaXhosa. In reality, even people with no mixed heritage who came from this region and matched the physical or cultural traits of any of the groups not easily classified as white would be classified as Cape colored. Similarly, Griquas were classified on the basis of heritage and geography, mainly found in what is now the Northern Cape of South Africa. Griqua people were people whose heritage were mixed between European colonists and the Nama people, a subset of Kuku who in the 1800s lived nomadically between Namibia and the western parts of South Africa. These first 3 categories show signs of an apartheid government still confident in its ability to use biology as its tidy benchmark for racial classification. But the inclusion of the 4th category, other colored, demonstrated the inability of the regime to fit coloredness into neat biological categories. Other coloreds were not easily identifiable as white, black, Chinese, or Asian, and were not from the Cape regions. Other coloreds necessitated the need for greater scrutiny of physical features like hair and complexion, and the added complexity of using cultural markers such as language, particularly the use of Afrikaans, friendships, economic status, and even food preferences as a way of excluding as many black people as possible from the status accorded to colored people. More importantly, however, it was to exclude as many people of mixed descent as possible from whiteness, the ultimate status.
Fast forward to apartheid. The government forced people into specific boxes based on their race, which we have as white, black, Indian, and colored.
In South Africa, because you had a situation where 6% of the population was in power and they were trying to control the remaining 94%, how do you go about doing that? That's a Herculean task. In America, you had the 1-drop rule. So if you were a person who had a drop of black blood in you, you were black. In South Africa, they couldn't allow the same metric because that meant you would now be a black person who is added to the majority, and the majority increasing was not something they wanted. So instead, what they set out to do was, they said if you were a person who was black, and then you were also half white, they would then recategorize you as a new race, and that race they called colored.
For many, it wasn't a choice. And because people were split through racial lines, it also created splits across different families. For many, it wasn't a choice. And colored became a box that you couldn't escape from. And here's the thing, there's no one makeup for colored. Okay, you've got Cape Colours with your Kaap slang and their own different music. And then you have your Kriwa people with their own unique history. You have your Rehobo bases in Namibia. You have your Zimbabwean colored community. Okay, all distinct, all unique. Then we have what we call first generational colors. Your Trevor Noah with a black mom and a white dad. Same story, but different backgrounds. They are both legally colored in South Africa, but their experiences aren't identical. Okay, let's talk about the difference between Tyler and Trevor. Both colored, but Trevor grew up in a predominantly black environment. Tyler grew up around people of the same race, people who are colored, and she grew up around that culture. And that is why she would identify, or it would be easier for her to identify as colored, unlike Trevor. But legally, they are both colored. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. For many colored people, life has always been an in-between. You know, you're too black to be white and too white to be black. That not enough for either shaped a whole generations. But you know what? Out of that came resilience, culture, humor, creativity. Today, colored culture is alive, thriving, and evolving. The slang, the food, recipes, cook sisters, Cape Malay curry, festivals like Dura Nivea, and Kaaps showing up in rap, literature, and comedy. And no, the Gatsby I'm talking about is not the American novel. I mean, the sandwich is so big, it can feed up to 4 people. So, what happens when colored identity goes global? Tyler found out the hard way. Whole saying colored or saying she's colored makes sense to us. Abroad, people hear something entirely different. Trevor Noah solved it by keeping it simple. In America, he says he's black. Not because he's ashamed, but trying to explain South African identity in 2 minutes. That's like explaining the Gatsby to somebody who's only ever had toast. And I also think it was easier for Trevor because Trevor lived predominantly with his black side of the family. Tyler, like I said, grew up with both parents, but then grew up in a community of people who looked like her, you know. So Trevor makes this absolutely lovely analogy that I love about how there are different levels to being colored, you know. He explains it using auras. So I'll insert the clip, but auras is a concentrate, right, that you take and you mix with water to make just like Kool-Aid sort of. So he was explaining how some colors are the auras in the bottle and some are the auras in the glass. So I'll just insert the clip here. And there are stereotypes. That is why this conversation matters. That is why this conversation matters. Context matters in all conversations. Colored people are not a punchline, and saying the word colored is not them trying to offend anybody in the world. This is a community with very deep roots, contribution, and pride. There's not much that I can do to do justice to this topic, but I just wanted people to understand and also get to where this came from, because I remember commenting on somebody's post. I'm like, by them saying she must say she is black, what they're trying to do is to erase her identity, her culture. And somebody in the comments said, I mean, I was saying, by saying colored is not just a race, colored is a culture. And somebody said in the comments, what culture? I was shocked that somebody, and this is not somebody from overseas, this was somebody in South Africa, this was a South African person who said, what culture? And I was shocked, and I was like, you know what, we can blame Americans and say, oh, they don't know, or they don't, but if we ourselves are asking what culture, then maybe there is a knowledge gap to say this is not just a racial thing, this is a cultural thing. So identity is complicated. It's history, it's family, and community. And at the end of the day, how someone chooses to identify themselves, colored, black, mixed, or anything else, blue, purple, orange, bicycle, is personal. That's up to them. And I don't think it's fair for any of us to impose our opinions on how somebody identifies themselves. Identity is personal and it deserves respect. Yeah, that is all. I hope it helps. And if it doesn't, let me know, but I can do a deep dive. This is just a shallow dive of how the colored community came to be, and it's deep. It's deep. If you think about how families were torn when that sticker came from the government to say there's colored people and your mom is black and your father's white and you are a completely different race, and it is the residue of the residual of what was left. We were all people at some point. So anyway, that's all I have. Please leave your comments. Please be nice. Like, the one thing I always try to avoid in my life is negativity. You bring negativity, gives a trend. But yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and join us next time when we break it down one crazy thing at a time. Bye guys.